Hello.
I stood in the living room, my heart racing, as I caught sight of the clock on the wall. It was nearly time. Jade, my grandson, was finally coming to visit. I'd been counting down the days for weeks now, looking forward to the few days we'd get together. He was in college across the country, and between his studies and the distance, I only saw him during holidays. It had been too long. I could hardly sit still. I kept fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing and wiping down counters like I could somehow erase the years since we'd spent time together. Then I heard it, the doorbell. My heart skipped. I raced to the door, not even bothering to glance in the mirror, but as I swung it open, I froze. There was Jade, sure, tall with that messy hair I loved, but standing next to him was a young man I didn't recognize. He was a little taller than Jade, broad-shouldered, with deep brown skin and a quiet smile that seemed unsure if he was welcome. Jade shifted awkwardly and rubbed the back of his neck, something he always did when nervous. "Grandma," he started, "this is my friend Kevin. I brought him with me. Hope that's okay." My mind whirled, my initial surprise fading quickly. Of course it was fine, I smiled warmly. "Come in, both of you." As they stepped inside, Jade kept talking, rambling a little. Kevin's parents were going through a divorce, and he had nowhere to go for the summer. Jade, being the kind-hearted soul he was, had invited him to stay. I blinked, processing everything. I hadn't expected company, but I wasn't about to turn them away. "Two's better than one anyway," I said with a laugh. "More to ease my own nerves than anything else." Kevin gave me a quiet, appreciative smile. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, but I waved it off immediately. "Call me Madison," I told him. "None of that man business." The last thing I needed was for him to feel uncomfortable. I felt the unease in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't exactly how I pictured my quiet weekend, but the truth was, something about the sudden chaos of it all made me feel alive again. Something that had been missing for far too long. I tried to ignore the fluttering feeling in my chest. We all sat down for lunch, a big, hearty meal that I'd cooked without thinking. Roast with mashed potatoes, gravy, and my signature apple pie. I tried to focus on the food, but Kevin's presence, well, it had a strange effect on me. The meal was surprisingly lively. Jade had this infectious energy, his stories flowing non-stop as he caught up with me, filling the silence I had become too accustomed to. But it wasn't just his stories that caught my attention. Kevin, quiet, reserved, had a way of listening that made you feel like you mattered. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush to speak. His presence was calm, grounding. It made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. As we ate, Jade kept teasing Kevin. "Grandma, you wouldn't believe it. Every time we're out, women just flock to him. It's like he's a magnet or something. It's ridiculous, I swear." "I hate him for it," he said, laughing as he pointed a fork at Kevin. Kevin just shook his head, his lips curling into a smile. "I can't help it. It's just the way I am." His voice was smooth, easy. When he spoke, I felt like I was being pulled in, even though I knew I shouldn't be. I hadn't realized it then, but I found myself staring at him longer than I should have. I caught myself mid-thought, realizing I had been ogling him like some schoolgirl. His jawline was sharp, his eyes dark and deep. I quickly looked away, suddenly aware of the awkwardness that was creeping up on me. "Is something wrong?" Kevin asked, breaking the silence. I snapped out of it, fumbling for an excuse. "Oh, no, I was just thinking about the dinner for tonight. I'll probably make something simple." Jade gave me a funny look but didn't press. Kevin, however, seemed to have noticed. His grin widened just slightly, like he knew exactly what I was thinking, but I couldn't tell if that made me feel more embarrassed or strangely flattered. When we finished eating, we moved outside to the porch, the air warm but not too hot. It felt nice to just sit there with the sun on our skin, the sound of birds chirping in the distance. Kevin, still wearing that calm energy, leaned back in his chair. I watched as Jade, with his usual scattered energy, paced the yard, talking about something he'd been planning all week. And then, without warning, Kevin stood up, stretching his long frame. "You know," he said, "your yard could use a little work. Let me help." His eyes flickered toward me, his smile more teasing than before. It wasn't a huge deal, but something about it made me feel oddly good, almost like it mattered. I couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed when Kevin mentioned the yard. The grass was long, and the bushes, well, let's just say they'd seen better days. But the thought of Kevin offering to help out made me feel oddly seen. Like, maybe for once, someone noticed the little details I'd let slide. I wasn't used to that. "Yeah, I suppose it's a bit wild out there," I admitted, chuckling nervously. "But if you don't mind the work, I'd be grateful." Jade, ever eager to jump into action, was already rushing to the shed to grab the tools. Kevin followed him, shaking his head with that same easygoing smile. As they worked, I stayed on the porch, sipping my iced tea and watching them, both of them moving with such confidence. There was something captivating about the way Kevin worked. He didn't rush, but each movement was deliberate, steady. His back muscles flexed beneath his t-shirt as he pushed the mower, the sun casting a golden glow on his skin. I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he moved, as if this was second nature to him. Meanwhile, Jade was hacking away at the bushes with way too much enthusiasm, cursing under his breath every time the hedge trimmers got stuck. I smiled, watching him with a fondness that came naturally. It was clear that he had no idea what he was doing, but his heart was in the right place. I looked back at Kevin. He caught my eye for a brief moment, his gaze soft, and something stirred in me that I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the combination of his effortless charm and the way he seemed to care about things that no one else did. Or maybe it was just the fact that I hadn't had someone around in a long time who made me feel this noticed. When they finished, the yard looked incredible, clean, neat, and nothing like the overgrown mess it had been before. I was genuinely impressed. "You two really did a great job," I said, feeling a little breathless. Kevin smiled, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Glad we could help." His voice was rich like melted honey, and I felt another unexpected flutter. What was happening to me? After the yard was all cleaned up, we headed inside for a quick break. I offered them both some cold drinks, my hands a little shaky as I made my way to the kitchen. My thoughts were racing, and I tried to ignore the way my heart fluttered every time Kevin flashed that smile of his. It was silly, I knew. He was young, barely 23, and I was no spring chicken anymore. But the way he carried himself, so effortlessly charming, so calm, pulled me in like a magnet. I felt like I was being foolish, but it was hard to push the feeling away. When I brought the drinks back to the porch, they were sitting together on the steps, chatting and laughing about some road trip they'd taken last summer. I slipped into the conversation easily, smiling as they retold the story of how Kevin had somehow convinced a cop to let them off with a warning after they got pulled over for speeding. "You should have seen it, Grandma," Jade said, laughing. Kevin just smiled, and the next thing we knew, the cop was practically thanking him for the good conversation. "It's like he's got some superpower or something." Kevin grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "It's all in the charm," he said, his voice low and smooth. I laughed, not sure how to respond. There was a strange warmth in the air between us, and I tried to push away the feeling of tension that had slowly been building inside me. But as the conversation continued, I caught Kevin glancing at me every now and then, his gaze lingering just a moment longer than necessary. And then it happened. One second we were all laughing about a stupid joke Jade had made, and the next, Kevin's hand brushed against mine as he reached for his drink. My breath hitched. For a split second I thought I felt something shift in the air between us. Before I could fully process it, Kevin's eyes locked onto mine, and there was a moment, just a moment, when everything seemed to stop. Then, without warning, it happened. He leaned in slightly, his lips brushing against mine in the gentlest of kisses. It was brief, but in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years, something I shouldn't have felt at all. I pulled back quickly, heart pounding in my chest, but Kevin's smile only deepened. I looked away, trying to regain composure, but the quiet that followed felt different now, almost charged. The day stretched on, the sun beginning to dip lower in the sky as we moved inside. Kevin and Jade were still full of energy, but I could feel the weight of the evening pulling at me. A strange, lingering tension hung in the air between us. After the kiss, no matter how brief or accidental, I couldn't stop my mind from racing. "Dinner's almost ready," I said, trying to push the thoughts aside. My hands were busy in the kitchen, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment. How had it even happened? Was I overthinking things? Was this just a silly lapse? I tried to shake it off, but the truth was, something had changed. I heard their voices from the living room laughing as they recounted more college stories. I couldn't help but smile. They were both so full of life, of youth, of possibilities, and here I was, feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in so long, that aching loneliness that often crept in during the quieter moments of life. Once dinner was on the table, we sat together, and I did my best to focus on the conversation, but inside, I was struggling. How was I supposed to pretend like everything was fine when my heart was betraying me? I caught myself glancing at Kevin more often than I should, his easy confidence still unsettling me in the best way. Every time I spoke to him, my voice felt a little unsteady, like I wasn't quite sure where to put my hands or how to sit. After dinner, we moved back to the porch, the evening air cooler now, a soft breeze ruffling our hair. Jade was relaxed, joking around with Kevin, but I was far more aware of every little detail. The way Kevin's eyes lingered a second longer than usual, the way he smiled at me like he knew something I didn't. It was the strangest thing, that smile. Warm, disarming, almost like an invitation. And then, as the evening wore on, something inside me snapped. I didn't want to fight it anymore. This fluttering, this strange pull I felt every time Kevin looked at me or spoke to me, or even when he just smiled. It wasn't something I could ignore, and I was done pretending I could. Without thinking, I stood up. My legs felt shaky as I walked over to where Kevin stood near the railing, watching the sunset. I caught his eye. "You ever get tired of being the life of the party?" I asked, my voice teasing, though it wasn't what I really meant. He laughed softly, that same easy charm slipping into his expression. "Not when the party's this good," he replied. I stepped a little closer. "You always know what to say." He shrugged, his face serious for a second. "It's not about what you say, it's about knowing when to say it." I didn't say anything in response, just felt something stirring within me. A need to do something, to take that last step, to finally stop overthinking it. Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers brushing his hand, and for a moment I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. And then it was gone, replaced by something else. Something more intentional. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as he slowly closed the distance between us, his hand gently cupping the side of my face. I thought for 1 second that I'd stop it, but instead I leaned in. His lips met mine again, this time with purpose, and I felt my breath catch. It was like time itself had stretched thin, and I was suddenly aware of everything. The way his fingers curled lightly around my waist, the warmth of the evening air, the way the world seemed to vanish around us. But just as quickly, it ended. Kevin pulled back first, and I felt the cool rush of reality hit me like a wave. This wasn't me. This couldn't be me. I wasn't supposed to feel like this. For a few seconds we just stood there, neither of us knowing what to say. Then Kevin spoke, breaking the silence with that same familiar, steady voice. "I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and confusion. "It's okay," I whispered, though it didn't feel like it was. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but I knew it was something I would never be able to forget. We didn't speak much after that, the rest of the evening slipping by in a blur. When it was time for them to leave, Kevin was the last to give me a hug. As he held me for just a moment longer than necessary, I felt the weight of everything that had just transpired sink in. I wasn't sure what it all meant, but I knew one thing for sure. I was different now. And whether it was for better or worse, I didn't know yet. As they drove away, I stood by the window, staring out into the quiet street. The house felt emptier now, quieter in a way that felt more like solitude than peace. I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath, and realized I was smiling, just a little, against the weight of everything. It was strange. It was uncomfortable, but it was real. And sometimes, that's all we ever need.
Bye bye.